I had just completed the necessary legal procedures, and I was finally ready to give my son $950,000 for his absolute dream home. But when I walked up to their ground floor apartment to surprise them, I accidentally overheard my son's wife talking with a strange man through a cracked open window, and I froze in my tracks. What I heard them say made my blood run cold. Right then and there, I decided to completely destroy her future. Before I continue this story, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you believe that family should be built on trust and that betrayal deserves to be punished without mercy. I need your support to know you are with me on this, because what I am about to tell you is something no father should ever have to experience. My name is Richard Caldwell, but everybody in my neighborhood just calls me Rick. I am 71 years old, and I have spent my entire life right here in Seattle, Washington. If you look at my hands today, you will see a detailed map of my life. They are rough, heavily calloused, and covered in thick, pale scars from 40 brutal years of working as a general contractor. I spent 4 decades climbing up freezing metal scaffolding in the bitter rain and the biting snow of the Pacific Northwest. I traded the cartilage in my knees and the raw strength in my back to build a small, successful construction empire framing houses piece by piece, brick by brick. I did it all for my family, ensuring we never had to beg or borrow from anyone. 5 years ago, I lost my beautiful wife Diane to a brief but devastating illness. Before she took her final breath in that sterile hospital room, I held her fragile hand and made her a solemn, unbreakable vow. I promised her that I would make sure our only son Bradley would be safe, financially secure, and completely taken care of for the rest of his life. Bradley is a genuinely good man. He is 38 years old, working as a software engineer. He is mild-mannered, incredibly trusting, and he loves his wife Monica with a blind devotion that always worried me just a little bit. Monica always presented herself as the perfect supportive partner, but my gut always told me she was meticulously calculating every move she made. Still, a promise to a dying wife is a sacred thing, so I quietly liquidated a massive portion of my retirement savings to buy them a home outright. Free and clear. No mortgage, no debt, just a rock-solid foundation for their future together. That brings us back to that fateful Tuesday afternoon. I was holding a crisp cashier's check for exactly $950,000, securely tucked inside the inner pocket of my worn leather jacket. It felt remarkably heavy against my chest, carrying the physical weight of all those years of hard labor, missed holidays, and early dark mornings. I drove my old truck to their apartment complex on the edge of the city to deliver the surprise of a lifetime. They lived in a modest unit on the ground floor. As I walked up the paved concrete pathway toward their front door, I noticed their living room window was cracked open just a few inches to let in the cool autumn breeze. I raised my hand fully, intending to call out and knock loudly on the door, but the sound of a deep, unfamiliar male voice drifting through that narrow gap made my heavy work boots stop dead on the concrete. Bradley was supposed to be at his corporate office until at least 6 in the evening, and I knew for an absolute fact he was not home. Yet another man was inside his living room, speaking in a smooth, arrogant tone that instantly put all my defensive nerves on edge. I instinctively stepped closer to the brick wall, pressing my back flat against the cold stone, and held my breath to listen. The stranger was speaking with complete and utter confidence. He said, and I quote, "When that stupid old man wires the money into the corporate LLC account, I will immediately initiate the transfer to the offshore holding. Once the funds clear international routing, you go ahead and file the divorce papers without warning. We will take the full 950,000 head straight to the East Coast and disappear completely. Bradley will be left with absolutely nothing, and that foolish old contractor will probably drop dead from a massive heart attack when he realizes his precious life savings are gone forever." My breath hitched sharply in my throat. I squeezed my eyes shut desperately, hoping my old ears were playing wicked tricks on me. But then I heard her voice. It was unmistakably my daughter-in-law, Monica, the very woman who smiled sweetly at my Sunday dinners, the woman who hugged me and called me Dad. She let out a cold, chilling laugh. It was a terrifying sound, completely devoid of any human empathy or warmth. She replied with a sinister confidence. "Do not worry about a single thing, Trent. Rick trusts me completely. The old fool actually thinks I am setting up this specialized trust to help him avoid massive estate taxes. He is so desperate to secure Bradley's future that he does not question a single word I say. In exactly 48 hours, every single drop of blood, sweat, and tears that old man poured into his miserable construction business will legally belong to us." I stood there in the shadows, completely paralyzed by the sheer gravity of their malice. For a long, agonizing moment, the entire world simply stopped spinning. The damp Seattle wind whipped violently around my face, but I did not feel the freezing cold. Instead, I felt a burning, suffocating heat rising rapidly from the pit of my stomach. My own daughter-in-law, the woman my gentle son worshipped and trusted implicitly, was not just having a cheap, vulgar affair. She was actively orchestrating a calculated, ruthless, and devastating financial assassination against my bloodline. She was enthusiastically planning to drain my life savings, leave my only child completely destitute and broken, and walk away laughing into the sunset with her lover. A lesser man, or perhaps a younger version of myself, might have kicked that wooden front door off its hinges right then and there. I wanted nothing more than to burst through that entryway, grab that arrogant stranger by his throat, and show Monica exactly what 40 years of lifting heavy steel beams does to an old man's grip. The urge for immediate physical vengeance was nearly overwhelming. I pictured my son sitting at his desk downtown, completely unaware that his wife was auctioning off his entire future. My hands balled into tight fists, my knuckles turning stark white against the brick wall. But my sharp intuition, deeply honed by decades of dealing with shady material suppliers, deceitful subcontractors, and complex business negotiations, screamed at me to hold back. If I exploded now, acting on pure rage with no solid proof other than my word against hers, Monica would flawlessly pivot to playing the victim. She was a master manipulator. She would undoubtedly shed crocodile tears dramatically, claim I was an insane, paranoid old man hearing voices, and Bradley, blinded by love, would likely believe her over me. It would destroy my relationship with my son forever, and she would still find a way to win. I slowly reached into my jacket. The money was still safely tucked inside my pocket. They did not have my signature yet. They did not have the cash. They only had their arrogant delusion that I was just a clueless, fading senior citizen ready to blindly hand over my empire. I realized in that profound moment of crystalline clarity that I could not just confront them with empty shouts. I had to utterly and systematically dismantle them. I had to let them continue to believe their wicked plan was working flawlessly while I secretly dug a massive, inescapable grave for their future. I closed my eyes tightly, took one long, slow breath of cold air to steady my violently shaking hands, and prepared to step onto the stage to put on the absolute performance of a lifetime. I was going to walk straight through that door and play the exact foolish part they expected me to play. They thought I was incredibly weak, but I was about to show them exactly how dangerous a father can truly be. Through the cracked window, ice clinked softly against glass in the damp air. Monica poured drinks, celebrating a premature victory. I leaned against the cold brick siding as her chilling laugh drifted out. It was entirely devoid of the sweet persona she had curated for 5 years. "You should have seen his face, Trent," Monica said, dripping with condescension. He sat at my dining table, nodding along to every lie I fed him. I used a few legal words about asset protection, and the old man practically begged me to set up the limited liability company. He genuinely believes Apex Horizon is a secure escrow. Trent chuckled darkly, making the hair on my forearms stand up. "It is almost too easy," he replied. "Blue-collar guys like him are terrified of the IRS. Say tax loophole and they hand over the keys to the castle. Are you absolutely certain Bradley will not catch on? What if he checks the routing numbers?" my son's name hung in the air. I waited for his wife to show a shred of hesitation. Instead, she simply scoffed. Bradley Monica's voice was laced with disgust. He does whatever I tell him to. He is so desperate to keep me happy that he never questions a financial document. I handle all the accounts and mail. He thinks we are finalizing the closing paperwork for the new house. Once that money hits your offshore account, I am handing him divorce papers. I will say I fell out of love, pack a bag, and meet you at the airport. He will be crying over his broken marriage while we are halfway across the Atlantic. The cold-blooded planning made my stomach turn. This was not a sudden mistake. This was a predatory, carefully orchestrated dismantling of my entire family's foundation. She had researched this, found a partner in crime, set up a fraudulent shell company, and played the loving wife, all while plotting to rob a grieving widower and bankrupt his only child. But the absolute worst part, the part that truly ignited a blazing fury inside my soul, was the callous way she spoke about my son. Bradley was a gentle soul who treated her like royalty. He worked long hours to provide for her, bought her expensive gifts, and defended her whenever I suggested she might be spending too much money. To hear her dismiss his unconditional love as a pathetic weakness was a level of evil I had never encountered in my 71 years. Trent clinked his glass against hers. "Well, to the easiest payday of my career," he said smoothly. "Once the wire transfer clears, the local branch, the funds bounce to 3 international proxies within 10 minutes. They will never trace it. And by the time the old man hires a lawyer, we will be completely untouchable. Just make sure he signs the authorization today. Do not give him time to consult an attorney." "I have him wrapped around my finger," Monica replied confidently. "He is bringing the cashier's check this afternoon. I will make him his favorite tea, kiss him on the cheeks, and he will sign his life away with a smile on his face." Standing there in the biting Seattle chill, the sudden urge to let raw violence take completely over was a breathing force growing inside me. Every muscle in my body pulled taut. My heavy work boots shifted on the concrete, ready to kick that front door off its hinges. I wanted to storm into that living room, grab that smug stranger by his collar, and throw him onto the street. I wanted to watch Monica's perfect, treacherous facade crumble into absolute terror as she realized her game was over. My large hands, resting inside my worn jacket pockets, traced the sharp edges of the paper cashier's check. That small piece of paper held 40 years of grueling labor. I closed my eyes and vividly remembered the endless winters on the scaffolding. I remembered freezing rain seeping through my waterproof gear, the agonizing throbbing in my lower back after framing houses for 12 hours straight, and the smell of wet sawdust that lingered on my skin. I gave up my youth and comfort to build a fortress for my family. I vividly remembered my sweet Diane. I remembered her soft hands gently rubbing warm ointment into my fiercely aching shoulders late at night. I remembered the tearful promise I made by her hospital bed, swearing on my life that our boy would never face the world without a secure roof over his head. Monica was not just trying to steal my money. She was trying to steal my legacy, my sweat, and the final sacred promise I made to the only woman I ever truly loved. The blinding rage rapidly boiled higher, practically begging me to take immediate physical action. But then the cold, pragmatic logic of a seasoned contractor finally kicked in. You never swing a heavy metal sledgehammer directly at a critical load-bearing wall without completely understanding the underlying structural support systems. If I burst into that apartment right now, screaming accusations and throwing threats, what would actually happen? I did not have a voice recording on my phone. I did not have a single physical shred of concrete evidence to present to the police. I only had what I had heard through a cracked window. If I confronted them, Trent would calmly walk out the door, wiping his hands clean of the entire situation. Monica would instantly switch into survival mode. She would burst into tears, call Bradley, and paint me as a delusional, paranoid old man hallucinating from the stress of losing his wife. Bradley, whose heart was too pure to imagine such evil existed, would side with his crying wife. He would think I had finally lost my mind. I would lose my beloved son forever, and Monica would simply find another way to bleed him dry over the next few agonizing years. No. Blind anger was a completely useless tool right now. I needed absolute, undeniable proof. I needed to trap them in their own web of lies, document every single piece of their fraud, and expose them in a way that left absolutely no room for doubt or manipulation. I had to let them think their wicked plan was proceeding flawlessly. I took one slow, deep breath, letting the freezing Washington air fill my lungs and cool the burning fire in my chest. I released my grip on the cashier's check and pulled my hands out of my pockets. I let my shoulders slump forward, adopting the posture of a tired, simple-minded senior citizen. I softened the hard lines of my face, practicing the warm, trusting smile of a father who was just happy to see his family. It was going to be the most difficult acting performance of my life, but my son's future depended on my absolute discipline. I turned away from the window, walked loudly down the concrete path to the front porch, purposely fumbled my heavy metal keys against the doorframe, and calmly prepared to bravely step directly into the viper's deadly nest. I turned my back to the cold brick wall, took one final deep breath of the freezing Seattle air, and let it fill my lungs before I made my presence known. I brought my heavy brass keyring up to the solid oak doorframe and let it drop intentionally from my fingers. The thick metal clattered loudly against the wood, the sharp, jarring noise echoing clearly across the quiet concrete porch. I followed that sound with a heavy rattling cough, a deep and raspy noise that I had perfected over decades of breathing in sawdust and fiberglass on busy construction sites. I wanted to make absolutely sure they heard me coming from outside. I stood there and waited for 3 full seconds, granting them just enough time to scramble, adjust their treacherous masks, and hide their true malicious intentions. Then I firmly turned the brass knob and pushed the front door wide open, stepping out of the bitter wind and into the stifling, artificial warmth of my son's living room. The sheer contrast between the malicious, blood-curdling venom I had just overheard outside and the picture-perfect domestic scene laid out before me was absolutely nauseating. If I had not stood frozen by that cracked window just moments prior, I would have genuinely believed I was walking into a living room straight out of a wholesome, heartwarming television commercial. The rich, inviting smell of freshly brewed hazelnut coffee filled the air entirely, masking the foul stench of their impending betrayal. Every single detail in the room was meticulously arranged to project an aura of safety and familial love. Sitting comfortably on the plush gray sofa, looking entirely relaxed and deeply professional, was the stranger. He had a sleek black leather briefcase resting open on the glass coffee table right in front of him, filled with neatly organized stacks of pristine white paper. He was wearing a sharply tailored navy blue suit that looked completely out of place and overly expensive for my son's modest apartment. His posture was impeccably straight, his expression seamlessly arranged into a flawless mask of polite, respectful patience. He looked exactly like the kind of wealthy, educated man a retired contractor was supposed to blindly trust. Over in the kitchen area, separated from the living room by a small granite breakfast bar, was Monica. She was gracefully pouring steaming coffee into porcelain mugs, with a serene, angelic smile plastered across her face. Her dark hair was perfectly pinned back, and she wore a soft pastel cardigan that made her look incredibly innocent and nurturing. It was a flawless, terrifying performance. She looked like the absolute epitome of a devoted, caring wife preparing to host her beloved father-in-law. And then there was my son. Bradley was standing near the narrow hallway, dressed in his casual weekend clothes, looking completely oblivious to the financial slaughter being orchestrated right in front of his eyes. His face lit up with pure joy the very moment he saw me walk through the door. He had that same genuine, trusting smile he had worn since he was a little boy. A sweet smile that broke my heart into 1,000 jagged pieces, knowing exactly what his wife was planning to do to him. He had absolutely no idea that the woman pouring his morning coffee was quietly counting the minutes until she could leave him bankrupt, abandoned, and completely broken. I swallowed the bitter taste of bile rising rapidly in my throat. I forced my facial muscles to relax into a gentle expression, deliberately letting my broad shoulders slump forward just a fraction more to properly sell the illusion of my advanced age and deep fatigue. I stepped fully into the room, holding my worn leather jacket tightly around my chest, completely hiding the cashier's check that was the key to their entire malicious scheme. "Dad, you made it," Bradley called out warmly, stepping forward to wrap me in a tight, affectionate embrace. I hugged my son back fiercely, closing my eyes for a brief moment to ground myself in reality. I patted his back, feeling the solid, honest weight of the boy I had raised silently, renewing my vow to protect him at all costs. Before I could even pull away from the hug, Monica was suddenly right there beside us. She set the coffee mugs down on the granite counter and practically glided across the hardwood floor toward me. "Oh, Dad, it is so incredibly wonderful to see you," she cooed, her voice dripping with a sickeningly sweet tone that made my skin severely crawl. She threw her arms around my neck and hugged me tightly against her. I could smell her expensive floral perfume, and it took every ounce of sheer willpower I possessed not to physically shove her away in absolute disgust. I forced a gentle, wavering smile, patting her shoulder with my rough, calloused hand, playing the part of the doting father-in-law to absolute perfection. "It is very good to see you too, sweetheart," I replied, making sure my voice sounded slightly winded and appropriately frail for a man my age. I looked over at the sofa and blinked a few times. "I see we have company today." I certainly did not mean to interrupt anything important. Monica pulled back, her eyes wide and shining with an expertly crafted look of deep, loving concern. "You are not interrupting at all, Dad. In fact, we were just waiting for you to arrive. Come sit down and rest your legs. I want to introduce you to someone very important to our family's future." She gently guided me by the arm toward the plush sofa, treating me as if I were made of fragile, shattered glass. I shuffled my feet slightly, exaggerating the chronic stiffness in my knees as I lowered my tired body into the armchair, directly across from the stranger. "Dad," Monica began, her voice taking on a hushed, reverent quality. "This is Trent Lawson. He is a highly specialized title and trust limited liability company expert. I brought him in exclusively to help us finalize the financial paperwork for the new house." Trent stood up immediately, buttoning his tailored suit jacket with a smooth, practiced motion. He extended a meticulously manicured hand toward me. "It is an absolute honor to meet you, Mr. Caldwell," he said, his voice deep, resonant, and overflowing with fake reassurance. "Monica and Bradley have told me so much about your incredible hard work over the decades and your incredibly generous gift to them." I reached out and grasped his hand. His grip was firm and overly polished, the exact handshake of a con man who made his living selling expensive lies to vulnerable, trusting people. I gave him a weak, trembling shake in return, perfectly maintaining my carefully constructed facade. "Nice to meet you, Trent," I muttered intentionally, letting my gaze wander around the coffee table in a confused, overwhelmed manner. "I thought we were just doing a simple bank wire transfer today. I am just a retired construction worker. I really do not know much about all this fancy corporate trust business you are talking about." Monica quickly knelt beside my chair, placing her soft, manicured hand over my rough, scarred knuckles. She looked up at me with an expression of pure, fabricated devotion. "I know, Dad," she said softly, squeezing my hand. "And that is exactly why I hired Trent to help us today. You have worked far too hard in the freezing rain your entire life to just hand your savings over and let the government take a massive cut. If you just wire that huge amount of money directly to our personal bank account, the Internal Revenue Service will flag it immediately. They will hit you with brutal estate taxes and massive gift penalties. They could legally take hundreds of thousands of dollars away from you. We simply cannot let the government steal the money you and Mom saved for so long." Bradley nodded along in complete agreement, looking down at his treacherous wife with sheer admiration. "She is absolutely right, Dad. Monica spent the entire week researching this specific process just to protect your hard-earned assets. Trent is going to set up a private holding account so the funds transfer completely tax-free. It is a perfectly legal loophole designed to keep your money safe from the state. I looked at my innocent son, violently suppressing the overwhelming urge to shake him awake and scream the truth in his face. Then I looked back at Monica and Trent. They were watching me intently, confidently, waiting to see if I would blindly swallow their poisonous bait. I let my mouth hang open slightly, adopting a look of profound, naive gratitude. "Well, I will be," I said, making my voice crack just a little with fake emotion. I had absolutely no idea they could heavily tax a gift from a father to a son like that. You kids are so incredibly smart to look out for an old man like me. I really do not understand all these complicated banking laws anymore. The modern world has just moved far too fast for me to keep up. Trent smiled warmly, but I could clearly see the triumphant, arrogant glint flashing in his cold eyes. He truly thought he had me completely hooked. He thought I was just another uneducated blue-collar relic who was terrified of taxes and easily swayed by a polished con man in a nice suit. "That is exactly what I am here for, Mr. Caldwell," Trent said smoothly, sitting back down and tapping his expensive silver pen against the thick stack of legal papers. "You do not need to worry your head about a single detail. We have everything perfectly prepared and ready to go. All we need to do today is process the cashier's check into the secure escrow trust, and Bradley and Monica will have the keys to their dream home by tomorrow afternoon." I nodded slowly, letting a wide, foolish grin spread across my weathered face. "You do not know how much peace of mind this brings me," I told them, staring directly into Monica's deceitful eyes. "To know that my son's future is in such incredibly capable hands makes an old man very happy. I truly appreciate all the hard work you both have put into securing this money for our family." Trent did not waste a single second. The moment those words left my mouth, he leaned forward and smoothly slid a thick stack of stapled documents across the glass surface of the coffee table. The papers came to a stop directly in front of me, accompanied by a sleek, heavy silver pen that he placed gently on top. He had the practiced fluid motions of a predator who had cornered his prey. "I assure you, Mr. Caldwell, the pleasure is entirely mine," Trent said, flashing a blindingly white smile that did not quite reach his cold, calculating eyes. "All we need from you today is your signature on the last page. This specific document authorizes your bank to wire the funds directly into the protective custody of Apex Horizon. Once the transfer clears, the money is completely shielded from any federal estate tax audits, and your son can close on the property immediately." I looked down at the crisp white paper, then slowly reached out and picked up the silver pen. It felt heavy and cold in my calloused hand. I intentionally let my fingers tremble just a fraction, playing the part of an overwhelmed senior citizen. But behind my tired eyes, my mind was working at lightning speed. I needed to test him to see just how deep this web of lies went. "Apex Horizon," I muttered carefully, sounding out the words as if they were a foreign language. "Now, is that a local bank downtown? I have done business with Seattle First National for over 30 years. I am just a simple contractor, Trent. I like to know exactly where my money is sitting before I lay my head down on the pillow at night." Trent chuckled, a soft, patronizing sound designed to make me feel small. He adjusted his silk tie and leaned back into the plush sofa. "It is not a traditional brick-and-mortar bank, Mr. Caldwell. It is a specialized private holding trust. We operate out of a secure corporate office in the financial district. Traditional banks report large cash transfers directly to the Internal Revenue Service. Apex Horizon acts as a legal shield, a secure intermediary that processes the funds strictly as a corporate asset transfer rather than a personal gift. It is a highly sophisticated financial instrument." "A financial instrument," I repeated slowly, letting my gaze drift up to meet his. "So you have been doing this specific type of work for a long time, then, helping families protect their life savings from the government?" "Over a decade," Trent lied flawlessly, without missing a single beat. A faint, barely concealed smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. I have personally overseen hundreds of these exact transactions. Your money is in the safest possible hands. I stared at him, holding his gaze for just a moment too long. I wanted to see if he would flinch under the weight of an honest man's stare. He did not. He simply maintained that smug, arrogant half-smile, utterly convinced of his own superior intelligence. He thought I was just a clueless, uneducated laborer, asking foolish questions to stall the inevitable. He thought he had completely outsmarted me. I slowly lowered my gaze back down to the legal document resting on the glass table. The glaring printed letters of the shell company seemed to mock me. I kept the heavy silver pen tightly gripped between my fingers, hovering the metal tip just an inch above the dotted signature line, but I deliberately did not move to sign it. The silence in the small living room began to stretch, growing thick and incredibly suffocating. The seconds ticked by, heavy and agonizing. I could physically feel the greedy anticipation radiating from across the table. When I did not immediately press the pen to the paper, the atmosphere shifted. The polite patience in the room rapidly began to evaporate, replaced by a sharp, nervous tension. Monica was the first to react. She was watching my hovering hand, like a hawk watching a field mouse. When she realized I was hesitating, her sweet, nurturing facade instantly vanished. It was replaced by a sudden, jarring display of theatrical emotion. Her lower lip began to tremble, and her dark eyes rapidly filled with perfectly timed, shining tears. "Dad," Monica said, her voice cracking, with a manufactured, heartbreaking sorrow. "Are you having second thoughts? Do you not trust me?" I looked up, intentionally widening my eyes in feigned surprise. "Now, Monica, honey, I never said that. I am just trying to understand all these complicated legal terms before I sign away my entire life savings. I spent weeks researching this, Dad," she cried, letting a single tear slip down her cheek. "I stayed up late every single night consulting with Trent, making absolutely sure that you and Bradley would be protected. I did all of this because I love this family. I just want Bradley to have a secure home. If you do not want to help us, if you think I am doing something wrong, just say so." She covered her face with her hands, letting out a soft, pathetic sob. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. She was aggressively pivoting the narrative, turning my reasonable hesitation into a cruel personal attack on her character. Bradley reacted instantly, exactly as she knew he would. He stepped forward, placing a protective arm around his wife's shaking shoulders. He looked at me, and for the very first time in my life, I saw a flash of genuine annoyance and profound disappointment in my son's eyes. It felt like a physical blow to my chest. "Dad, come on." Bradley sighed, his voice tight with frustration. "Monica has been incredibly stressed out about this entire process. She has done absolutely everything she can to make this easy for you. Trent is a certified professional. Please do not be so paranoid. You are insulting my wife in our own home." I sat perfectly still, absorbing the heavy, disrespectful weight of my son's reprimand. The woman he was fiercely protecting was actively plotting to destroy his entire existence, and he was completely blind to it. It took an agonizing amount of restraint not to grab him by the shoulders and forcefully drag him over to the window so he could hear the truth for himself. Instead, I swallowed my pride. I let the bitter insult wash over me, locking it away in the deepest, darkest corner of my mind. I slowly lifted my eyes and looked directly at Trent. He was sitting back on the sofa, watching the emotional domestic drama unfold with quiet, smug satisfaction. The smirk on his face was now fully visible, a silent, arrogant declaration of total victory. He was deeply enjoying watching a good father being scolded by his own son. He thought the psychological pressure would force my hand. He thought I was broken. I gripped the heavy silver pen even tighter, staring intently at the dotted signature line on the fraudulent paperwork. I knew that I absolutely had to make my next move flawlessly to safely escape this suffocating room without signing my life away to these ruthless predators. I kept my eyes fixed on the thick black line at the bottom of the page, the heavy silver pen still resting lightly between my calloused fingers. In the world of construction, you learn very quickly that survival depends entirely on your ability to notice the smallest, seemingly insignificant details. A hairline fracture in a foundation, or a slight sag in a crossbeam, can be the precise difference between a successful build and a catastrophic collapse. For 40 years, my livelihood and my physical safety had relied on that sharp, finely tuned instinct. Now, sitting in my son's comfortably heated living room, that exact same instinct was screaming at me with deafening intensity. I slowly lifted my gaze from the paper, allowing my eyes to drift across the glass coffee table, deliberately studying the man sitting opposite me. Trent Lawson was a masterclass in superficial perfection. His posture was rigid, his suit was impeccably tailored, and his smile remained plastered in place like a cheap coat of paint over rotting wood. But as I watched him, the polished illusion began to crack under the weight of my silent scrutiny. He shifted his weight slightly on the sofa, adjusting his left cuff, and that was when the sleeve of his navy blue jacket rode up just enough to reveal his wristwatch. It was a heavy, gleaming timepiece with a distinctive fluted bezel and a solid gold band that caught the soft afternoon light filtering through the window. I am not a man who cares much for luxury fashion, but when you spend decades managing multi-million-dollar commercial building contracts, you quickly learn to recognize the expensive toys that wealthy developers like to flaunt. That watch was a Rolex day date, a piece of intricate machinery that easily cost upwards of $40,000. It featured a distinct champagne dial and a presidential bracelet, unmistakable to anyone who had ever negotiated with wealthy high-rise developers downtown. It was a flashing beacon of wealth that made no logical sense. A standard title clerk or a mid-level trust consultant simply did not make the kind of money required to casually wear a luxury vehicle on their left wrist. Men who worked in legitimate administrative paper pushing did not flaunt solid gold accessories during a routine house closing for a middle-class family. Men who stole massive fortunes from unsuspecting victims, however, absolutely did. The watch was a glaring, arrogant mistake. It was the structural flaw in his perfectly engineered facade. I let my eyes linger on the golden band for just a fraction of a second before bringing my focus back to his face. Trent noticed my gaze and quickly pulled his sleeve down, his fake smile faltering for the briefest moment. The sudden twitch in his jaw told me everything I needed to know. He was nervous. He knew he was sitting dangerously close to the finish line, and the raw anticipation was making him careless. I had built my entire life on reading men exactly like him, men who thought a slick vocabulary and an expensive suit could effortlessly mask their lack of basic human decency. I slowly returned my attention to the stack of legal documents resting on the glass table. I adjusted my reading glasses, pretending to squint at the fine print with the tired eyes of a confused old man. Monica leaned closer, the sweet scent of her floral perfume washing over me once again. She pointed a perfectly manicured fingernail at the final paragraph, gently tapping the space where she desperately needed my signature to go. It was a wire transfer authorization form designed to bypass my local bank and send my life savings directly into their waiting hands. I read the beneficiary details carefully, tracing the letters with the tip of the pen. The receiving account was not listed under a bonded state-regulated escrow service. There was absolutely nothing on this crisp white paper that proved my money was going toward a physical piece of real estate. It was not a legitimate insured title company. The beneficiary name, printed in bold ink, was Apex Horizon Limited Liability Company. Any honest contractor who has ever purchased a plot of land knows exactly how real estate transactions are supposed to work. When you buy a house, your funds go into a highly secure, neutral escrow account, safeguarded by strict federal regulations, until the title legally clears. You never, under any circumstances, wire $950,000 directly into a private corporate business account. Apex Horizon was not a protective trust. It was a hollow shell, an empty corporate ghost ship designed to instantly receive my money and immediately scatter it across untraceable offshore accounts, exactly as Trent had boasted through the window. The sheer audacity of their blatant fraud was almost breathtaking. They were treating me like an absolute fool. I kept my breathing slow and measured consciously, forcing my heart rate to remain steady. I could physically feel the oppressive, suffocating tension building inside the small room. The air grew incredibly thick and heavy, charged with the toxic, desperate greed radiating from the two predators sitting mere feet away from me. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a sudden silent exchange between Monica and Trent. It was a fleeting, hungry glance, a sharp, impatient visual command that spoke volumes. Monica's eyes practically screamed at him to close the deal, while Trent gave a microscopic, tense nod, signaling her to maintain the pressure. They were a coordinated team of hunters, silently circling their wounded prey, absolutely starving for the kill. I could hear the faint, rapid tapping of Monica's designer shoe against the hardwood floor, a tiny rhythmic sound that betrayed her overwhelming desperation to finalize the theft. She was so close to tasting victory, so incredibly close to fleeing the country with my hard-earned fortune, that her usual flawless composure was beginning to visibly fray at the edges. My son Bradley stood quietly in the background, completely oblivious to the wicked, silent conversation happening right in front of him. He looked at me with a soft, encouraging smile, genuinely believing that we were simply taking care of routine administrative paperwork to secure his happy future. The tragic, heartbreaking innocence in his expression fueled the burning fire in my chest. I knew that the very second I placed my signature on that dotted line, his marriage would abruptly end, his financial stability would be completely wiped out, and his trusting heart would be shattered beyond repair. The heavy silver pen felt slippery in my sweating grip. Trent leaned forward again, his smooth voice cutting through the heavy silence in an attempt to rush the process. "We are almost at the finish line, Mr. Caldwell," he murmured smoothly. "Just a quick signature right there, and your family's future is completely secured and protected from the government." I looked down at the fraudulent document, then back up at Trent's waiting face. The room felt exactly like a highly volatile pressure cooker, the walls slowly closing in around us. I knew that I absolutely had to execute my own sudden exit strategy flawlessly. I kept my eyes locked on the dotted line. The silver pen was hovering mere millimeters above the paper, trembling just enough to sell my performance. I could hear Trent shift his weight on the plush sofa, the leather creaking slightly, as he leaned in, eager to witness the exact moment my life savings became his offshore treasure. Monica was holding her breath. The silence was absolute, heavy with their toxic anticipation. I knew I had a fraction of a second to derail this runaway train. I pressed the very tip of the silver pen against the white paper, letting a tiny dot of black ink bleed into the fiber. And then I let my tired, calloused hand completely give out. I opened my fingers, allowing the heavy pen to slip from my grasp. It dropped onto the thick glass of the coffee table with a sharp, sudden, jarring metallic clatter that echoed violently through the quiet apartment. Instantly, I gasped. It was not a quiet, subtle breath, but a sudden, ragged intake of air that sounded exactly like a man whose lungs were suddenly failing him. I brought my right hand up to my chest, curling my calloused fingers into the fabric of my worn flannel shirt, and gripped it as hard as I could. I squeezed my eyes shut, contorting my face into a mask of sudden agony, and let out a strained groan from deep within my throat. The reaction in the room was instantaneous. My son Bradley lunged forward, his face instantly draining of all color. He dropped to his knees beside my chair, his hands hovering frantically over my shoulders, completely terrified. "Dad," he shouted, his voice cracking with pure, unadulterated panic. "Dad, what is wrong? Are you okay?" I leaned heavily against the armrest of the chair, forcing my breathing to become shallow and incredibly rapid. I kept my eyes tightly closed, shaking my head slowly from side to side. "It is my chest, Bradley," I rasped out, making sure my voice sounded incredibly weak and terribly fragile. "It is a sharp pain. Just a sudden sharp pain right in the center. My heart is beating much too fast." Monica was on her feet in a split second, but her reaction was entirely different from my son's. While Bradley was consumed by genuine fear for his father's life, Monica was staring in sheer unmasked horror at the unsigned document resting on the glass table. Her eyes darted wildly between my clutching hand and the blank signature line. For a brief, unguarded moment, her mask completely slipped, revealing the ruthless, starving predator hiding just beneath her beautiful features. "Oh my goodness, Dad," Monica stammered, her voice pitched high and tight with desperate anxiety. "You just need to relax. Take a deep breath. Trent, pour him a glass of water right now." Trent stood up quickly, but he did not move toward the kitchen. He stood frozen, staring down at me with a look of profound, furious irritation. His perfectly orchestrated financial assassination was suddenly falling apart right at the absolute finish line, derailed by an old man's failing heart. He practically glared at my chest, as if he could forcefully command my heart to behave just long enough to sign his fraudulent paperwork. "I need my pills," I whispered, letting my head loll back against the cushion, dramatically opening my eyes to stare blankly at the ceiling. "My blood pressure medication. I was supposed to take it an hour ago, but I was so focused on bringing this cashier's check over that I completely forgot to bring my pill organizer. I can feel my pressure spiking dangerously high. My doctor specifically warned me about these sudden palpitations." Bradley pulled his phone from his pocket, his hands shaking visibly. "I am calling 911 right now, Dad. Just hold on. The paramedics will be here in 5 minutes. "No," I said sharply, perhaps a little too sharply, before immediately softening my tone back into a frail, breathless wheeze. "No ambulances, son. Please. I cannot stand hospitals. It just makes my anxiety so much worse. I just need my medication and my own bed. If I can just get home and take my pills, this terrifying feeling will hopefully pass. It has happened before. I just pushed myself entirely too hard today." Monica stepped forward, hovering over me like a vulture circling a wounded animal. She actually had the sheer audacity to gently push the wire transfer document an inch closer to my trembling hand. "Dad, are you absolutely sure you do not want to just sign this really quickly before we take you home?" she asked, her voice dripping with toxic, manipulative sweetness. "It will only take 2 seconds. Then you will not have to worry about a single thing. You can just rest easy knowing Bradley's home is completely secure." I looked at her, fighting the overwhelming urge to spit right in her deceitful face. She was perfectly willing to let me have a massive coronary event right here on her living room floor, as long as my signature was legally binding before I hit the ground. I slowly shook my head, keeping my expression entirely clouded with pain and confusion. I reached my shaking hand into the inner pocket of my leather jacket, deliberately pressing my fingers against the thick envelope holding the $950,000 cashier's check. I patted it securely, making sure they both saw exactly where the money was resting. "I cannot focus on reading a single word right now, Monica," I wheezed, staring blankly at the glass table. "My vision is blurring. I would not even be able to hold the pen steady." Trent instantly stepped closer, dropping his professional demeanor entirely. He looked desperate, his jaw tightly clenched. "Mr. Caldwell, the trust account is ready to receive the funds today. If we delay this, the tax window might close and you will lose a significant amount of money to the state. We strongly advise completing this immediately for your own financial protection." I gripped the armrests of the chair and slowly, painfully pushed myself up to a standing position. Bradley immediately grabbed my elbow, supporting my weight. I looked directly into Trent's cold, calculating eyes. "My doctor was very clear about these episodes," I said, keeping my breathing labored and heavy. "When this happens, I am strictly ordered to take 48 hours of absolute complete bed rest. No stress, no financial decisions, no heavy lifting. If I do not rest for 2 full days, I could have a fatal stroke. We will have to put this entire transaction on hold." Trent's face hardened into a mask of pure, restrained fury. Monica let out a sharp, frustrated breath that sounded almost exactly like a hiss. They were completely powerless. They could not force a supposedly dying man to sign a legal document in front of his son without exposing their true monstrous nature. I am so incredibly, truly sorry, kids, I mumbled apologetically, leaning heavily against Bradley's strong shoulder as he guided me slowly toward the front door. We will regroup after my mandatory rest period. Let us aim for Friday morning. I will go straight to my bank and make absolutely sure this money goes exactly where it belongs. I promise you that. As Bradley helped me step out onto the cold concrete porch, I glanced back over my shoulder one last time. Monica and Trent were standing side by side in the living room watching my departure, with eyes full of murderous rage. They thought they were losing precious time, but they had no idea that those next 48 hours were going to be used to meticulously dig their graves. As soon as the words left my mouth, the illusion of domestic tranquility completely shattered. Monica stepped directly into my path, her caring demeanor vanishing in an instant. Her eyes, which had been so wide and weeping just moments prior, hardened into dark, desperate slits of pure panic. She lunged forward, closing the distance between us with a sudden, aggressive motion that startled even my son. Her hand darted out, her perfectly manicured fingernails hooking directly onto the heavy fabric of my worn leather jacket, aiming straight for the inner pocket where she knew the cashier's check was safely tucked away. "Dad, you cannot walk out of here with nearly $1 million in your pocket," Monica insisted, her voice tight and trembling with raw greed. "You are not thinking clearly right now. You are having a medical episode. It is unsafe for you to be driving with that kind of money while your heart is failing. Leave the check here with us for safekeeping. Trent can secure it in his briefcase, and we will simply wait until you feel better to finalize the signatures. Please give it to me." She actually tried to forcefully slide her hand inside my coat. The sheer audacity of her physical boundary crossing sent a jolt of adrenaline straight through my veins. Before she could even brush the edge of the paper envelope, I reacted. I brought my rough right hand up and firmly swatted her wrist away. It was a sharp, highly forceful gesture, not violent enough to genuinely hurt her, but carrying the undeniable heavy strength of a man who had spent his entire life working with heavy machinery. Monica gasped sharply, pulling her hand back and cradling it against her chest, her face twisting in absolute shock at my physical resistance. I immediately masked my swift reaction with the grumbling, highly irritable tone of a stubborn, fiercely independent senior citizen. "Do not ever treat me like a helpless child." "Monica," I barked purposely, letting my voice sound gruff and deeply offended. "I have carried a whole lot more responsibility than this on active construction sites before you were even born. Nobody touches my money but me. It stays right here in my inner pocket until my heart stops fluttering and my physician explicitly tells me I am cleared to conduct serious business. I will absolutely not have strangers holding on to my life savings no matter how expensive their tailored suits are." Trent stood rigidly in the center of the living room, his face flushed with a dark, furious crimson. He was absolutely seething, his hands clenched so tightly at his sides that his knuckles were stark white. He had been mere inches away from an effortless offshore payday, and now he was helplessly watching it walk right out the front door. He opened his mouth to argue, stepping forward with a suddenly menacing posture, but he quickly caught himself. He knew that aggressively pushing a seemingly sick old man in front of his protective son would instantly break his professional cover. He forced his tense facial muscles to relax, exhaling a sharp, frustrated breath through his nose, and offered a stiff, defeated nod. "Of course, Mr. Caldwell," Trent said smoothly, though I could clearly hear the angry grinding of his teeth beneath his highly polished words. "We completely respect your boundaries. Your physical health is the absolute priority here today. We will simply place the trust formation on a temporary administrative hold until Friday morning." Monica was practically vibrating with suppressed violent rage, but she strategically mirrored his calculated retreat. She forced a tight, incredibly fake smile back onto her face, though her dark eyes remained lethal. "We just want what is best for you, Dad," she whispered, her voice heavily laced with a bitter venom she was desperately trying to conceal from her husband. Bradley stepped squarely between his wife and me, placing a gentle, supporting hand on the middle of my back. He did not say a word to Monica, but I could sense his lingering confusion over her sudden, aggressive outburst. "Come on, Dad," Bradley said softly, his voice thick with genuine concern for my fabricated medical condition. "Let me help you out to your truck. You need to get home and lay down immediately. I will follow you in my car to make sure you arrive safely." Shook my head, keeping my breathing shallow as we moved slowly through the narrow apartment hallway. "No, son," I wheezed, leaning into his supportive grip. "I will be perfectly fine once I am sitting behind the wheel. I just need quiet. I need absolute silence to let my heart rate settle back to normal. You stay here with your wife. She has clearly worked very hard today, and she needs your support right now." We reached the front door and stepped out onto the cold, concrete porch. The freezing Seattle wind hit my face, and for the first time that afternoon, it felt incredibly refreshing. Bradley walked me all the way to my battered pickup truck parked by the curb. He carefully opened the heavy metal door for me and helped me climb up into the worn driver's seat. As I settled in, I looked down at my son. His kind, open face was etched with deep worry. He was such a good, honest man. He had inherited his mother's beautiful, trusting heart, and it completely shattered my soul to know that very same heart was going to be brutally destroyed in less than 48 hours. I felt a massive wave of sorrow wash over me, a heavy, agonizing grief for the devastating storm that was about to utterly obliterate his entire world. "I love you, Bradley," I said, my voice dropping its frail act, just enough to carry the profound weight of a father's absolute devotion. "Do not ever forget that. No matter what happens, I will always protect you." He smiled a sad, worried little smile and patted my knee. "I love you too, Dad. Please call me the absolute second you get home and take your pills." I nodded and pulled the heavy door shut. I turned the key in the ignition, listening to the familiar, comforting roar of the old engine coming to life. I shifted the truck into drive and slowly pulled away from the curb, leaving my son standing alone on the sidewalk. I drove down the street for exactly 3 blocks before I hit a red stoplight. I put my foot firmly on the brake pedal and looked up into the rectangular rear-view mirror. The reflection staring back at me was no longer a weak, trembling, confused old man, terrified of estate taxes and heart palpitations. The stooped posture was completely gone. The frightened, innocent gaze had vanished. I squared my broad shoulders against the leather seat and let the cold, calculated fury finally settle into my hardened features. I reached into my inner jacket, feeling the solid paper check firmly against my chest. Monica and Trent thought they had cleverly manipulated a foolish senior citizen. They thought they were the apex predators in this scenario. They were dead wrong. The frail old man was gone, and the ruthless, calculating protector had fully taken the wheel. I kept my foot pressed on the brake as the light turned green. I accelerated the truck, guiding it through the intersection before pulling over. I eased the tires against the curb, shifted into park, and let out a breath. The fabricated tightness in my chest evaporated instantly, replaced by a sharpened focus. I was not a frail senior citizen suffering from a cardiac event. I was a man going to war for his son. I pulled out my phone. The digital clock read 2:15. The 48-hour countdown had officially begun. I needed absolute ruthlessness, and I knew who to call. I scrolled through my contacts and pressed the name Victor Rossi. Victor was not the kind of lawyer who smiled and offered polite compromises. He was a cynical, highly aggressive litigator who spent 30 years defending commercial contractors against corporate developers. He was a bulldog who lived for the fight. The phone rang twice before his gruff voice answered. "Victor," I said, my voice completely steady and stripped of any manufactured weakness. "I have a massive problem, and I need your undivided attention right now." "Rick," Victor replied, the background noise fading as he closed his door. "You sound like you are standing on the edge of a cliff." Talk to me. What is going on? My daughter-in-law is attempting to steal $950,000 from me through a fraudulent trust, I explained. She has a corporate accomplice in my son's living room right now. They tried to strong-arm me into wiring the funds into a shell company called Apex Horizon. I faked a medical emergency to escape the apartment with the check in my pocket. I bought us 48 hours before they expect me back at the table. There was a sharp whistle on the line. A fake medical emergency, Victor mused. You always knew how to buy time on a collapsing job site. Get down to my office right now. I am clearing my afternoon schedule. I hung up and immediately dialed a second number. This one belonged to Garrett, a former state police detective who transitioned into private investigative work. Garrett was a ghost, a man who specialized in tracing assets, tracking movements, and finding the darkest secrets people tried to bury. He answered on the first ring. Garrett, I need you on the move immediately, I commanded. I am texting you an address in Queen Anne, my son's apartment. There is a man inside wearing a tailored navy suit and a $40,000 gold watch. He goes by the name Trent Lawson, though I doubt that is his real name. He will be leaving the premises shortly. I need to know exactly where he goes, who he meets, and where he rests his head tonight. Consider him tagged. Rick Garrett replied smoothly. I am 10 minutes away from that location. What are the rules of engagement? Total surveillance, I instructed. Do not alert him. Just watch, document, and report. He is working with my daughter-in-law to siphon my life savings. I need to know if they are romantically involved, or if this is strictly a professional criminal enterprise. Follow the suit, Garrett. He is our weak link. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and merged back into the flow of city traffic. The drive to Victor's downtown office took 20 minutes, but my mind raced ahead. I thought about Bradley, my trusting boy sitting in that apartment, completely unaware that his beloved wife was calculating the most efficient way to ruin him. The sorrow I felt for him was immense, a heavy anchor in my stomach, but I could not allow that grief to slow me down. I had to dismantle this entire operation brick by brick, just like a condemned building. I parked in the underground garage and took the elevator directly to the 14th floor. Victor was waiting for me at the glass doors of his firm. He ushered me into his spacious corner office, bypassing his secretary entirely. His mahogany desk was already cleared of its usual clutter, replaced by 2 open laptop computers and a legal notepad. He gestured for me to sit in the leather chair opposite him. Tell me everything, Victor demanded, taking a seat and resting his hands on the keyboard. Leave absolutely nothing out. I recounted every agonizing detail of the afternoon. I described the sickeningly sweet smell of hazelnut coffee, Monica's flawless domestic performance, and Trent's arrogant, rehearsed corporate terminology. I explicitly detailed the wire transfer authorization form, emphasizing the lack of a bonded escrow account and the glaringly suspicious entity listed as the sole beneficiary. Apex Horizon, Limited Liability Company. Victor repeated, his fingers flying across the keys. Let us see exactly what kind of ghost ship we are dealing with here. Give me a minute to access the corporate registry. The room fell silent, except for the rapid clicking of the computer keys. I watched Victor's eyes dart across the bright screen, his bushy eyebrows knitting together in deep concentration. He opened a secondary database, cross-referencing whatever vague information he had managed to uncover. In the world of commercial fraud, the devil is always hiding in the smallest administrative details. Just as I suspected, Victor announced, leaning back in his chair with a grim expression. Apex Horizon is not a protective real estate trust. It is a domestic shell corporation registered exactly 3 weeks ago. There is no physical office address listed, just a post office box in a strip mall across town. The registered agent is a generic corporate proxy service designed to hide the identities of the actual owners. They set this up purely to catch your funds and instantly wire them offshore. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed violently against the wood of the mahogany desk. I picked it up and put it on speakerphone so Victor could hear. It was Garrett. I have visual contact. Garrett reported, his voice low and steady against the faint hum of a car engine. The target just exited your son's apartment building. He is moving fast, clearly agitated. He just climbed into a black luxury sedan. Monica is not with him. Stay on him, Garrett, I said, leaning closer to the phone. Victor just confirmed the shell company is a complete fabrication. We need to know where Trent is taking his frustration. I am 2 car lengths behind him, Garrett assured me. He is driving aggressively, heading straight toward the financial district. I will update you the moment he makes a stop. Let us see what kind of rat hole this guy scurries into when things go wrong. The line went dead. I looked across the large desk at Victor. We had successfully stalled their financial trap, but the real work had only just begun. We had exactly 48 hours to gather enough concrete, undeniable evidence to completely destroy Trent's professional cover and expose Monica's treacherous heart to my son. I settled deeply into the leather chair, feeling a cold, righteous determination settle into my bones. The predators were now the prey, and we were closing in. For the next 45 minutes, the only sounds in Victor's office were his rhythmic keyboard tapping and the low hum of the air conditioning. I sat perfectly still, staring out the windows at the Seattle skyline, waiting for Garrett to make his move. My phone finally vibrated against the mahogany desk, shattering the quiet tension. I pressed the speaker button instantly. Garrett did not bother with pleasantries. His voice was sharp, professional, and entirely focused. The target ran an evasive counter-surveillance route. Garrett reported traffic, echoing through the speaker. Trent did not go to the financial district at all. He drove 6 blocks, pulled into a subterranean parking garage, and waited. Exactly 12 minutes later, Monica slipped out of the service exit of your son's apartment building. She wore a heavy trench coat and oversized sunglasses to avoid being recognized. She climbed straight into the passenger seat of Trent's black luxury sedan. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. She had not even waited for Bradley to leave for work before sneaking out to scheme with her partner. "Where are they now?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously level. "They drove out of the upscale neighborhoods," Garrett explained, his camera shutter clicking over the line. "They headed straight toward the industrial district on the south side. They just pulled into the parking lot of a severely run-down roadside motel. It is the kind of place that rents rooms by the hour and does not ask for identification. It is a massive contradiction to the $40,000 watch and the tailored Navy suit. I have a clear line of sight from across the street. I am using a telephoto lens to document their movements." "Are they just talking in the car?" Victor asked, leaning closer to the phone. "No, they are moving," Garrett replied quickly. "Trent just parked near the back of the lot, far away from the streetlights. They are walking toward room 114. Monica is clinging to his arm. Their body language is highly intimate, not a standard professional relationship. Trent just used a physical brass key to open the door. They are inside. The curtains are drawn shut. Give me exactly 3 minutes. I am going to walk into the lobby and politely ask the front desk clerk whose name is on that registry." The line went silent for a few agonizing moments. I looked at Victor, the bitter reality of Monica's absolute betrayal settling over me like a heavy, suffocating blanket. She was not just robbing my son blind. She was intimately involved with the very man orchestrating his financial ruin. The phone crackled back to life. "I have the registry details," Garrett announced, his tone laced with dark satisfaction. "They paid for a week entirely in cash. The room is registered under the names Arthur and Diane Blackwood. They are using completely fabricated aliases to establish a hidden base of operations. This cheap motel is their secure staging ground entirely off the grid. I will maintain total visual surveillance on room 114. Nobody goes in or out without me photographing it." "Excellent work, Garrett," I said firmly. "Stay invisible. Do not let them know they are being watched." I ended the phone call and leaned back in the heavy black leather chair, rubbing my face. The sheer scale of their deception was staggering. Monica played the devoted wife to Bradley, while operating out of a seedy motel room under a fake name with her partner. They were absolutely determined to drain every single dollar of my life savings and vanish into the shadows without leaving a single trace behind. Victor let out a low, dangerous whistle, his eyes locked onto his computer monitor. Well, Rick, your private investigator just handed us a massive piece of the puzzle, but what I just found in this corporate database is the absolute nail in their coffin. Victor spun his laptop screen around so I could see. Look closely at the routing structure for Apex Horizon Limited Liability Company. It is not just a standard shell corporation. It is a highly sophisticated financial trap designed by an absolute professional. I leaned forward, studying the complex web of bank routing numbers and corporate registrations. I am a contractor, Victor. You need to translate this into plain English for me. Victor pointed a thick finger at the center of the screen. When you authorize a wire transfer to Apex Horizon, the money does not stay in Washington State. It does not even stay in the country for more than 3 seconds. The primary domestic account is automatically set up to mirror the funds directly into a secondary offshore holding trust. That secondary trust is permanently domiciled in a foreign sovereign territory that holds absolutely zero extradition treaties with the United States. I stared at the screen, the horrific mechanics of their trap finally snapping into crystal clear focus. So the moment the bank clears my check, the money instantly crosses international borders. Exactly. Victor confirmed, his voice deadly serious. Once those funds hit that specific offshore account, the United States federal government has absolutely no legal jurisdiction to touch it, freeze it, or reclaim it. Your money would effectively evaporate into thin air. If you had signed that wire transfer document in your son's living room today, Trent and Monica would have simply walked out the door, boarded a plane, and disappeared to an untraceable tropical paradise as millionaires. You and Bradley would have been left bankrupt, holding a fraudulent piece of paper that law enforcement could not do anything about. The profound, chilling realization washed over me. Monica had smiled at me, poured me fresh coffee, and held her husband's hand while methodically preparing to utterly destroy our family lineage. She had flawlessly faked tears of anxiety just to pressure an old man into signing his own financial death warrant. The absolute lack of basic human conscience was deeply terrifying. I slowly stood up from the leather chair, feeling a burning, relentless fire completely consume the sorrow in my chest. The time for feeling heartbroken over Bradley's fractured marriage was over. I needed to act with the exact same ruthless precision that Monica and Trent had employed against us. Print every single page of that complex routing data, Victor. I ordered, my voice dropping to a low, commanding register. Print the shell company registrations, the offshore account details, and the foreign treaty laws. I want a physical paper trail so thick and undeniably clear that the district attorney will not even have to think twice before issuing a warrant. We are going to lock this entire trap down from the inside out. Victor offered a sharp, wolfish grin, already hitting the print command on his keyboard. You have 46 hours left, Rick. What is your next move? I am going to walk straight into my local bank tomorrow morning, I stated very coldly, turning toward the heavy glass doors of his office. But I am absolutely not going to wire them a single dime. I am going to buy the heavy steel chains needed to securely and permanently lock their miserable cage forever. Victor did not waste another second. As soon as those words hung in the air between us, he turned his intense focus back to the glowing monitors illuminating his mahogany desk. His thick fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard with a highly practiced, rhythmic intensity. If Apex Horizon is a fabricated ghost ship, then the captain steering it is absolutely using a fake name, Victor stated, his voice completely devoid of any doubt. Trent Lawson is a perfectly generic placeholder. We need to find out exactly who is wearing that $40,000 watch right now. I paced slowly across the entire length of the spacious corner office, feeling the residual adrenaline continuing to hum through my veins. Victor opened a specialized legal database, the kind of deeply restricted network that only high-level litigators and law enforcement agencies could legally access. He bypassed the standard corporate registries and dived straight into the federal disciplinary archives. He began cross-referencing the physical description I provided, combined with the specific methodology of the offshore wire transfer trap we had just dismantled. The room remained completely silent for nearly 20 minutes, save for the steady hum of the central air conditioning and the rapid clicking of the keys. I stood by the large floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the busy city streets below, actively suppressing the burning violent anger I felt toward Monica. Finally, Victor let out a sharp, triumphant grunt and slapped his palm flat against the desk. "I have him," Victor announced, a grim satisfaction coloring his rough voice. He turned the laptop screen toward me for the second time that afternoon. "Trent Lawson does not exist. The man sitting on your son's sofa today is named Julian Vance. He is not a certified title clerk, and he certainly does not hold a valid legal license to practice trust management in this state or any other state in the country." I stepped away from the glass window and leaned over the heavy wooden desk to look at the screen. Staring back at me was a formal, incredibly sterile photograph of the exact same man who had tried to hand me that silver pen. The smug, arrogant smirk was missing from this official government photo, replaced by a cold, deeply unpleasant glare. Julian Vance was a high-end investment broker downtown until exactly 4 years ago. Victor explained, tapping the screen right below the photograph. In 2018, the Securities and Exchange Commission permanently revoked his federal trading license. He was the primary central architect of a massive wire fraud scheme that actively targeted elderly high-net-worth widows. He would gain their trust, convince them to transfer their liquid assets into private holding accounts, and systematically drain their life savings. He narrowly avoided federal prison by turning state's evidence against his own corporate partners. He is a certified, legally documented financial predator. The sheer reality of Monica's partnership with a known, legally documented criminal sent a fresh wave of absolute disgust washing over my conscience. She had not simply hired a shady local accountant to avoid paying a few $1,000s in property taxes. She had actively sought out and partnered with a highly sophisticated, ruthlessly experienced con artist. They were specifically targeting my advanced age banking entirely on the assumption that a retired blue-collar contractor would never have the resources or the legal intelligence to verify their complex corporate trap. They severely underestimated my protective instincts. Victor pulled his reading glasses down to the bridge of his nose and quickly opened a completely different browser window. "We know exactly who he is, and we know exactly where he was trying to send your money," Victor murmured, his eyes scanning the bright digital text. "But we still need to understand the physical real estate aspect of this massive scam. Monica and Bradley have already picked out a house. They took you on a comprehensive tour of that beautiful suburban property last week. Let us pull the official county property records and see exactly who holds the current deed to your son's absolute dream home." Victor typed the exact street address into the county assessor's digital database. The loading icon spun for 3 agonizing seconds before the official public records finally populated on the bright screen. Victor let out a long, heavy sigh, shaking his head with a profound sense of professional disgust. He rubbed his temples, a gesture of pure frustration at the sheer, unadulterated evil of the legal documents laid out before him. "Rick, this is much worse than just a simple offshore wire theft," Victor said, his voice dropping to a somber, deeply serious register. "They were not just planning to steal your $950,000 today. They were actively planning to leave your son holding a massive, devastating bag of catastrophic financial debt." I leaned heavily against the wooden edge of the desk, my hands gripping the polished surface. "Explain it to me, Victor. Tell me exactly what they did to my boy." Victor pointed directly at the property history section of the digital file. "The house is not owned by a traditional family seller or a standard real estate development group. It was quietly purchased exactly 2 months ago by an anonymous holding group. 2 days after that purchase, a massive, highly predatory private mortgage was taken out against the physical property. And the lender officially listed on that predatory mortgage contract is none other than Apex Horizon Limited Liability Company." My mind raced to process the sheer terrifying scope of the financial devastation they had meticulously orchestrated. They had secretly leveraged the entire property through Julian's fabricated offshore shell company. "If you had signed that wire transfer authorization today," Victor continued, his tone absolutely relentless, "your money would have instantly bypassed domestic jurisdiction and vanished into their completely untraceable offshore accounts. That is step one. But step two is where they utterly destroy your son. Because Apex Horizon holds the primary mortgage note on that specific property, the absolute second your cash disappeared, Apex Horizon would have immediately claimed a catastrophic default on the loan. The blood in my veins turned to absolute ice. They would foreclose on the house, I whispered, the sickening reality finally taking shape. Exactly, Victor confirmed, slapping the desk with his open palm. The bank would immediately seize the property. Bradley would be completely blindsided. He would be legally bound to a fraudulent real estate contract with absolutely zero financial equity to his name. His credit would be instantly decimated. He would lose the home entirely, and Monica would simultaneously file for a rapid divorce claiming irreconcilable financial differences. She would walk away completely clean, an innocent victim on paper, while secretly splitting nearly $1 million in untraceable cash with a documented federal fraudster. They designed this trap to utterly consume your son and leave him completely bankrupt. I stood up perfectly straight, the heavy oppressive sorrow evaporating from my chest. It was instantly replaced by a cold, calculating, and lethal clarity. They had meticulously designed the perfect corporate execution, completely blind to the fact that I was already rewriting their ending. I stared at the glowing computer monitor for a long moment, my mind moving past the immediate threat of the fraudulent wire transfer and branching out into the darker, unseen corners of my son's marriage. If Monica had partnered with a federal criminal to steal my savings and leverage a fake mortgage, she had likely been laying the groundwork for this escape for many long months. She had full access to Bradley's personal information, his confidential banking details, and his social security number. I turned back to Victor, feeling a cold, hard knot tightening in the pit of my stomach. "Victor," I said, my voice dangerously quiet and deadly serious. "Pull Bradley's personal credit history. Right now. If she is actively preparing to completely abandon him and flee the country, she would not leave any valuable financial resources untapped. I need to know exactly what his financial foundation looks like beneath the surface." Victor nodded, his thick fingers immediately flying across the keyboard with absolute precision. He logged into a highly secure, heavily restricted portal that connected directly to the primary national credit bureaus. He typed in Bradley's basic identification details, hitting the enter key with a heavy, definitive strike. We waited in absolute breathless silence as the bright screen processed the complex request. When the comprehensive report finally populated, Victor let out a sharp, ragged breath. He slowly took off his reading glasses and rubbed his eyes, looking genuinely sickened by what he was seeing. "Rick," Victor murmured, his tone dropping to a grim, horrified whisper. "It is a complete financial bloodbath." I walked around the heavy mahogany desk and stood directly over his shoulder. The digital columns of numbers and bright red warning flags painted a horrifying picture of absolute financial slaughter. According to the official federal records, over the past 6 consecutive months, an alarming number of unsecured personal loans and high-limit credit cards had been rapidly opened under my son's identity. "Look at these specific origination dates," Victor said, pointing a thick finger at the screen. "These are not joint accounts. They are solely in Bradley's name, but the contact email addresses route to a secondary, completely hidden server. She has systematically and entirely drained his personal borrowing capacity. There are 4 separate personal loans listed here, completely unsecured, totaling exactly $200,000. She has completely maxed out 5 premium credit cards. The minimum monthly payments alone are completely unsustainable for a man on his modest salary." I felt a sickening, dizzying wave of nausea wash over me. My boy, who had always been so incredibly careful with his hard-earned income, was completely buried under a massive mountain of toxic, predatory debt. Monica had essentially stolen his identity quietly, forging his electronic signature to siphon every single available cent of his credit. She was bleeding him entirely dry, hoarding the stolen cash in her untraceable offshore accounts, while leaving him permanently chained to the crushing, inescapable financial liability. If the bank forecloses on the house and these unsecured loans immediately default, Bradley will face total, irreversible bankruptcy. I observed, my voice trembling with heavily suppressed rage. He will be financially ruined for the rest of his natural life. He will lose absolutely everything. It gets worse, Victor said, his eyes suddenly catching a subtle, easily overlooked detail near the very bottom of the extensive electronic report. A whole lot worse. Look at the recent soft inquiries section. There is a background check recorded here from exactly 5 weeks ago. It was not initiated by a bank or a standard credit card company. It was processed by a premium high-risk life insurance underwriter. I felt the temperature in the spacious office violently plummet. The short hairs on the back of my neck stood up as a dark, truly terrifying realization began to take solid form in my mind. A life insurance underwriter. I repeated, feeling the heavy words catch painfully in my throat. Why would she be taking out a brand new life insurance policy on a perfectly healthy young man? Victor did not answer me immediately. He rapidly opened another highly specialized database, his jaw clenched so incredibly tightly that a prominent muscle twitched in his cheek. He aggressively searched through state insurance registries, hunting down the specific policy number tied to the inquiry. When the official document finally appeared on the bright monitor, the sheer, unfathomable magnitude of Monica's absolute evil was laid bare for us to witness. She purchased a massive term life insurance policy on Bradley Victor, stated, his voice completely devoid of any human emotion. It went into active effect precisely 1 month ago. The guaranteed financial payout upon his death is structured for exactly $3 million. And the sole uncontested beneficiary officially listed on the binding contract is his lovely wife, Monica. I gripped the edge of the heavy wooden desk so hard my knuckles turned entirely white. The room began to spin slightly as the fragmented, isolated pieces of their horrific conspiracy snapped perfectly into a cohesive, deadly picture. This was never just a simple real estate scam. It was not just a plot to steal my life savings and ruin my son's credit score. The terrifying truth of their operation was infinitely more sinister and bloody. Monica and Julian Vance were meticulously engineering a scenario where Bradley would be left completely destitute, entirely heartbroken, and hopelessly buried in overwhelming corporate debt. They were planning to vanish with my stolen fortune, leaving him utterly alone in a foreclosed home to face absolute ruin. They were intentionally creating a desperate, suffocating environment specifically designed to push a good, trusting man to the absolute brink of total despair. And sitting right at the end of that dark, hopeless tunnel was a $3 million payout, just waiting to be claimed by a grieving widow living safely beyond the reach of American law enforcement. They were setting him up to die, I whispered, the horrific, brutal reality finally piercing my hardened exterior. They were going to completely destroy his entire world, strip him of absolutely everything he ever loved, and then rely on his absolute psychological despair to trigger that massive financial payout. Or worse, Victor. With Julian's extensive criminal background and powerful offshore connections, they could very easily arrange a fatal, untraceable accident once the initial dust settled. They were literally pricing his life. Victor looked directly up at me, his sharp eyes filled with a grim, undeniable agreement. A broke, emotionally devastated husband facing federal bankruptcy and a sudden, highly public divorce is statistically highly vulnerable, Rick. In the eyes of a corrupt insurance investigator, a personal tragedy under those specific engineered circumstances rarely raises any serious red flags. They built a flawless, self-executing trap. They were going to completely butcher your family and walk away wildly rich. The heavy sorrow that had been weighing down my heart was instantly incinerated by a roaring, uncontrollable inferno of pure, violent rage. I had spent 40 demanding years building strong, unyielding foundations to protect the people I loved. I had poured immense sweat and blood into providing a safe, totally secure life for my boy. I would absolutely not allow a pair of greedy, heartless parasites to turn his very existence into a convenient corporate payday. I pushed myself forcefully away from the mahogany desk and began pacing the wide floor, my analytical mind calculating structural stress points and explosive demolition tactics. Monica truly thought she could play the loving, devoted wife while secretly tightening a hangman's noose around my son's neck. Julian thought his expensive suits and clever offshore banking tricks made him completely untouchable by a common laborer. They had absolutely no idea what an angry, determined father was truly capable of doing when his only child was openly marked for death. "Victor," said, stopping by the large glass window and looking out over the sprawling, darkening city. "I need you to completely draft a comprehensive ironclad dossier containing every single piece of damning evidence we have gathered today. The fake mortgage, the forged unsecured loans, the offshore shell, accounts, the hidden motel registry, and this completely predatory life insurance policy. I want it all legally bound, deeply verified, and fully ready for immediate devastating prosecution. I am going to tear their entire criminal operation down straight to the bedrock." "You have my absolute word, Rick," Victor replied, already organizing the digital files into a highly secure, encrypted folder on his desktop. "I will have a bulletproof legal package ready for you before the sun even comes up tomorrow morning. But how exactly do you plan to handle the volatile situation back at the apartment? You still have to physically face them on Friday morning." "I am going to give them exactly what they want," I stated, my voice echoing with a cold, absolute, uncompromising certainty. "I am going to look them dead in the eye and smile. I am going to let them believe they have completely won the war. And then I am going to forcefully drop the entire building right on their heads." The 48 hours passed with the slow rhythm of wet concrete curing in the cold. I spent every waking second securely locked inside Victor's office, organizing a mountain of explosive legal documents into a devastating portfolio. By Friday morning, the gray Seattle sky was heavily overcast. Bradley drove his sedan to my house, insisting I should not drive so soon after my medical episode. When I climbed into the passenger seat, I kept my breathing shallow and let my shoulders slump, maintaining the illusion of a fragile old man recovering from a cardiac scare. Bradley looked over at me, his honest face etched with deep exhaustion. He had not slept well over the past 2 days, worrying about my failing health while trying to manage his very demanding wife. "Are you sure you are feeling up to this today?" Dad, Bradley asked gently. "We can push this closing back a week if you need more rest." I patted his arm, feeling a sharp twist of sorrow. "I am perfectly fine, son," I murmured, keeping my voice soft and textured with fake fatigue. "We just need to get this finalized so you and Monica can move forward together." We drove in silence toward the financial district, pulling into the parking garage of a glass high-rise. The notary office was located on the 20th floor, a sterile corporate environment designed to make working-class people feel small and intimidated. We walked through the glass doors, and the receptionist directed us toward a private conference room at the end of the corridor. I walked slowly, leaning heavily on my son's arm for support, my free hand tucked inside my leather jacket, resting against the thick dossier hidden inside my breast pocket. When Bradley pushed the oak door open, the suffocating atmosphere inside the conference room hit me like a physical wave of heat. Monica and the man calling himself Trent Lawson were already seated at the massive polished table. The second we crossed the threshold, I could see them both practically vibrating with a raw, ravenous greed. They were 2 starving predators forced to wait 2 agonizing days, desperately eager to finally sink their teeth into my life savings. Monica sprang out of her leather chair, her heels clicking rapidly. She threw herself across the room to wrap her arms around my neck in a fabricated embrace. "Oh, Dad," she cooed, her voice pitched to a trembling frequency of manufactured relief. "I have been sick with worry about you. Are you feeling better?" I forced a weak smile, gently patting her back. "I am doing much better today, sweetheart," I replied, staring directly over her shoulder at the man sitting across the table. "Just a little tired, but ready to get this sorted out." Trent stood up, buttoning his tailored charcoal suit jacket with a practiced motion. He offered a polite, sympathetic nod, completely masking the ruthless criminal named Julian Vance hiding just beneath the surface. "It is genuinely wonderful to see you looking so well, Mr. Caldwell," he said, his deep voice saturated with fake warmth. "Please have a seat. We will make this as quick and painless as possible for you." Bradley pulled out a leather chair for me, and I slowly lowered myself into it, with a soft, exhausted sigh. Monica sat down right next to Bradley, sliding her chair aggressively close to his. She wrapped both hands tightly around his left arm, resting her head gently against his shoulder. It was a flawless, convincing portrait of a devoted spouse. She looked like a woman hopelessly in love with her husband, radiating pure dedication. The terrifying contrast between her sweet physical affection and the brutal reality of the $3 million life insurance policy she had secretly taken out on his life made my stomach violently churn. She was holding the hand of the man she plotted to destroy. Trent did not waste a single moment. As soon as we were settled, he reached into his sleek leather briefcase and pulled out the exact same stack of stapled documents from Wednesday. He placed them carefully in the center of the polished oak table, smoothing the crisp white paper with his manicured fingers. He slid the silver pen directly toward me. "I know you have been through a highly stressful ordeal, Mr. Caldwell," Trent murmured, adopting the soothing tone of a medical professional, delivering a gentle diagnosis. "I assure you that everything has been completely prepared and verified. We simply need to execute the final wire transfer authorization today. Once you sign this specific page, the funds will be safely routed into the Apex Horizon Protective Trust, and Bradley will officially receive the keys to his beautiful new home." I stared down at the fraudulent document, the letters of the fake shell company practically glowing under the harsh fluorescent lights. I kept my hands resting quietly in my lap, purposefully ignoring the silver pen. Monica squeezed Bradley's arm tighter, her dark eyes entirely locked onto my motionless hands. I could literally feel the desperate toxic energy radiating from her body. She was mentally willing me to pick up the pen and sign my own financial death warrant. Trent leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the wooden table, tilting his head with an expression of deep empathy. "If you are feeling overwhelmed, Mr. Caldwell, we can easily review the specific routing numbers one more time," he offered smoothly. "I want you to feel absolutely secure in this process. Your peace of mind is my top priority." I slowly lifted my head, letting the fabricated illusion of the weak, confused old man melt away. I squared my broad shoulders against the back of the leather chair and looked directly into the cold, calculating eyes of Julian Vance. The silence in the room suddenly grew heavy, instantly charged with a dangerous shift in the atmosphere. My peace of mind. I repeated my voice, dropping the frail act and settling into a deep, resonant, and entirely unyielding tone. "That is an incredibly fascinating choice of words, Trent. Or should I just call you Julian?" The entire room froze instantly. The smug, arrogant sympathy on Trent's face instantly shattered, replaced by a rigid mask of absolute unadulterated shock. Monica violently flinched, her hands suddenly releasing Bradley's arm, as if she had just been physically burned by a hot iron. Bradley looked back and forth between us, confused by the sudden drastic change in my posture and my incredibly sharp tone. I reached inside my leather jacket, bypassing the pocket that held the cashier's check entirely, and pulled out the thick, heavily secured legal dossier that Victor had meticulously prepared. I slapped it down onto the center of the polished oak table with a deafening, incredibly heavy thud that made both Monica and Julian physically jump in their seats. "We are not going to talk about peace of mind today," I stated coldly, sliding the silver pen out of my way. "We are going to talk about federal wire fraud, predatory offshore mortgages, and a $3 million life insurance policy. Let us just see exactly how quickly you both stop smiling." The echo of the heavy legal dossier hitting the polished oak table hung in the sterile air of the conference room. I did not break eye contact with the man sitting across from me. I reached out slowly and picked up the sleek silver pen he had just slid across the table. I held it between my rough, calloused fingers, feeling its smooth, expensive weight. Trent, or rather Julian Vance, stared at my hands. His carefully constructed mask of professional sympathy was completely gone, replaced by a rigid, entirely colorless expression of sudden, absolute terror. Monica sat perfectly still, her breathing suspended, her eyes darting frantically between the thick stack of papers and my hardened face. I rolled the silver pen between my thumb and index finger for 3 long, agonizing seconds, letting the unbearable tension stretch until it felt like the very walls of the room were going to crack. Then, with a sudden, forceful flick of my wrist, I threw the expensive pen completely across the wide room. It struck the far glass wall with a sharp, violent crack and clattered uselessly onto the hardwood floor. So I asked loudly, my voice booming through the enclosed space with absolute, unwavering authority. When exactly does the money hit the offshore accounts for Apex Horizon Limited Liability Company? Does it bounce through the Cayman Islands first, Julian, or do you wire it directly to a non-extradition territory? Bradley flinched, as if I had physically struck him. He looked at me completely bewildered, his mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. Dad Bradley stammered, his voice thick with profound confusion and mounting panic. What are you talking about? What offshore accounts? His real name is Trent. We are just signing the final trust documents for the house. I did not look at my son. My eyes remained completely mercilessly locked onto the man sitting across the table. I want to know the exact timeline, Julian. I continued, my tone dropping to a lethal, menacing register. I want to know exactly how fast you plan to execute the predatory default on my son's new mortgage. Were you going to wait a full month to foreclose on the property and leave him entirely bankrupt? Or were you just going to seize the asset the very second my cash cleared your fraudulent international borders? Julian opened his mouth to speak, his perfectly manicured hands twitching nervously against the edge of the table. He attempted to summon his smooth corporate defense, but the sheer volume of detailed insider information I had just unleashed completely paralyzed his practiced tongue. He knew instantly that I possessed the exact blueprints to his entire criminal enterprise. His eyes darted toward the heavy oak doors, calculating the physical distance between his leather chair and the only available exit. He is not a trust manager, Bradley, I stated, finally turning my head to look at my deeply confused son. His real name is Julian Vance. He is a disgraced former investment broker whose federal trading license was permanently revoked for orchestrating massive wire fraud schemes. And the protective real estate trust you are supposed to sign today is actually a predatory holding company designed to completely steal my life savings, instantly foreclose on your beautiful dream home, and drown you in insurmountable toxic debt. I watched the color completely drain from Bradley's honest face as he slowly turned to look at the man sitting across the table. The brilliant, hopeful future he had carefully envisioned was rapidly dissolving into a dark, terrifying nightmare right before his very eyes. The last remaining traces of Julian's smug, arrogant smile completely vanished from his pale face. The sophisticated, highly polished corporate disguise he had worn so effortlessly was entirely stripped away, leaving behind nothing but the desperate, cornered expression of the exposed federal criminal. He pushed his chair back from the heavy oak table, his breathing growing shallow and erratic as the sheer gravity of his compromised situation settled over him. Monica, however, chose a completely different tactic. She sprang out of her leather chair like a coiled spring, her face flushed with a furious, highly theatrical outrage. She forcefully pointed a trembling finger directly at my chest, her dark eyes completely wide with feigned, absolute disbelief. "You have completely lost your mind!" Monica screamed, her voice echoing shrilly against the glass walls of the confined conference room. "Bradley, you cannot possibly listen to a single word of this insane, paranoid delusion. He is suffering from severe cognitive decline. He is having a massive psychological breakdown. I told you that his physical and mental health were rapidly deteriorating. He is completely destroying our entire future because he is too sick and utterly confused to understand basic financial documents." She desperately reached out and grabbed Bradley's shoulders, trying to physically pull him away from my side of the table and forcefully anchor his loyalty to her completely fabricated narrative. "Bradley, please, you have to stop him right now before he ruins absolutely everything we have worked so incredibly hard to build together." Bradley stood up slowly, raising both of his hands in a frantic, desperate attempt to calm the rapidly escalating, highly explosive situation. "Monica, just wait a second," Bradley pleaded, his voice cracking under the immense, crushing weight of the sudden chaos. "Dad, you are making some incredibly serious, deeply disturbing accusations here. You cannot just throw these massive, life-altering claims around without providing some kind of concrete, undeniable proof. I did not need to provide the proof myself." The heavy, solid oak doors of the private conference room suddenly swung wide open with a loud, incredibly authoritative thud. Standing squarely in the wide threshold was Victor Rossi. His customary aggressive, cynical demeanor was amplified by the highly intimidating presence of the two individuals standing immediately behind him. They were deeply serious men wearing sharp, professional dark suits, their respective golden badges clearly visible clipped securely to their leather belts. Victor stepped purposefully into the brightly lit room, holding a thick, perfectly organized stack of highly official legal warrants in his right hand. He looked directly past Monica's hysterical performance and locked his sharp, predatory gaze onto the pale, trembling man sitting across the table. Julian Vance Victor announced, his deep, gravelly voice commanding absolute, undeniable authority over the entire room. "I am Victor Rossi, and these two gentlemen are senior investigators operating directly with the Federal Financial Fraud Division. We have secured extensive, fully executed legal warrants to immediately seize every single document inside your briefcase, freeze every offshore account linked to Apex Horizon, and formally charge you with multiple counts of severe premeditated wire fraud." Monica stopped screaming instantly, her arms falling completely limp at her sides as she stared in absolute silent, breathless horror at the approaching federal agents. The sheer, terrifying reality of the massive, inescapable legal consequences suddenly crashing down around her completely shattered her flawless, carefully maintained facade. The highly calculated, incredibly vicious trap they had meticulously built for my trusting son was now the exact same heavy steel cage that would successfully lock them away in federal prison for many long, miserable years. The silence in the room was broken by the rapid breathing of the two cornered criminals across the oak table. I turned my attention away from Julian Vance and looked directly at my son. Bradley was standing frozen, his eyes darting frantically between Victor Rossi, the two federal agents, and his wife. He was desperately trying to process the impossible nightmare unfolding before his eyes. I needed to break the final illusion Monica held over him. I reached back into the deep pocket of my worn leather jacket and retrieved a thick manila envelope. Garrett had personally delivered it to Victor's office late last night after hours of unbroken surveillance. I held it up for a brief moment, letting the silence stretch. "You told my son you were visiting your sister on Wednesday afternoon, Monica," stated my voice echoing like a judge delivering a final verdict. "You claimed you needed some quiet time to decompress from the immense stress of finding this dream home." I tossed the thick manila envelope onto the polished oak table with a swift flick of my wrist. It landed squarely in front of Bradley. The metal clasp popped open on impact, and a dozen glossy photographs spilled out, sliding smoothly across the shiny wood surface. Bradley slowly reached down with trembling hands and picked up the top photograph. I watched his honest, deeply trusting face crumble as his reality shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The high-resolution images captured by Garrett's expensive telephoto lens were absolutely undeniable and brutally clear. They showed Monica wearing a heavy trench coat and oversized dark sunglasses clinging intimately to Julian's arm in the secluded parking lot of a severely run-down roadside motel. Other photographs clearly showed them unlocking the door to room 114. Their bodies pressed tightly together in a highly suggestive manner that left absolutely zero room for any innocent professional explanation. Bradley dropped the glossy photograph onto the table as if the paper were coated in burning acid. He staggered backward, his legs hitting the edge of a heavy leather chair, his breathing turning into shallow, rapid gasps. He looked at Monica, his eyes wide with a devastating agony that broke my heart. "Monica," he whispered, his voice cracking painfully under the crushing weight of the ultimate betrayal. Tell me this is a mistake. Tell me this is not real. Monica could not even bring herself to look at him. She stared blankly down at the glossy photographs, documenting her dirty infidelity, her face completely drained of color, her mouth opening and closing silently like a suffocating fish. She had seamlessly played the role of the perfect supportive wife for years, and now the ugly truth was laid bare for her husband to witness. She clutched her expensive designer handbag against her chest, physically shrinking into her leather seat as the crushing weight of her exposed sins finally caught up with her. The beautiful partner my son had devoted his life to was nothing but an empty parasitic shell. I did not give her a single second to formulate another desperate lie or manipulate my son's broken heart. I stepped forward, pointing my index finger directly at the pale, sweating man shrinking into his expensive charcoal suit. "Your brilliant trust manager is a federally documented predator," I announced loudly, making sure every single word struck the room like a physical blow. Julian Vance had his official broker license permanently revoked by the government 4 years ago for systematically draining the life savings of elderly widows. He is not sitting here to secure a legitimate mortgage for you, Bradley. He is sitting here to obliterate your financial existence and leave you with nothing. I tapped my hand aggressively against the heavy legal dossier Victor had brought into the room. "We pulled the official county deed on your perfect suburban dream home, son," I explained, my tone radiating cold authority. "It is not owned by a standard family seller or a legitimate real estate group. It was secretly purchased by an anonymous holding group, and it is currently mortgaged to Julian's fabricated offshore shell company, Apex Horizon. If I had signed that fraudulent wire transfer today, my $950,000 would have instantly bypassed domestic banking laws and vanished into an untraceable foreign account outside the jurisdiction of the United States government. Stealing my retirement fund was only the first phase of their highly calculated execution." I continued, my voice rising with righteous fury as I exposed the absolute bottom of their depravity. "The second step was designed specifically to bury you. The very second my cash disappeared across the border, Apex Horizon was legally scheduled to claim an immediate default on the property loan. They were going to forcefully foreclose on the house within a matter of days. You would be left holding a completely worthless contract, buried under insurmountable corporate debt. Your credit score would be instantly destroyed, and you would be legally forced into total bankruptcy while they simply walked away. But the absolute sickest part of your brilliant master plan had nothing to do with real estate or offshore bank accounts," I growled, taking a menacing step closer to the trembling fraudster. "The real grand finale of your operation was the $3 million life insurance policy Monica secretly purchased on my son 5 weeks ago. You systematically designed a flawless, self-executing psychological trap. You were fully prepared to leave an innocent man completely destitute, utterly heartbroken, and buried alive under crushing corporate debt. You were actively counting on his inescapable despair to trigger a massive financial payout for a fake grieving widow hiding safely in an untraceable tropical paradise." Julian Vance stared at me, his arrogant corporate disguise dissolving into raw panic. Heavy drops of sweat poured down his forehead, staining the crisp collar of his tailored shirt. He began stammering incoherently, desperately, trying to construct a legal defense out of thin air, but his words collapsed into entirely meaningless syllables. He was suffocating under the overwhelming avalanche of heavily documented federal evidence we had systematically gathered against him. He realized that his brilliant scam had been dismantled by the exact same retired blue-collar worker he had so foolishly underestimated from the very beginning. Julian pushed his leather chair backward, with a loud screech against the hardwood floor. He abandoned his briefcase, his stack of fraudulent documents, and the terrified woman sitting beside him. He scrambled backward, his eyes darting toward the heavy oak doors, searching for an avenue of immediate escape. He took 2 rapid steps toward the corridor, but did not make it a single inch further. The 2 federal fraud investigators immediately stepped forward, moving with highly trained precision. They blocked the only exit, their broad shoulders forming a solid wall of federal authority. One agent calmly reached behind his back, the metallic rattle of steel handcuffs echoing sharply through the dead silence. "You are absolutely not going anywhere," Julian Victor Rossi stated, placing a firm hand on the stack of legal warrants. "Your offshore ghost ship just ran aground on our shores, and your entire criminal operation is now permanently closed forever." The two federal agents immediately moved forward, seizing Julian by both of his arms and forcefully pressing him against the cold glass wall of the conference room. As they began reciting his Miranda rights in a low, methodical murmur, I completely ignored the struggling, disgraced broker. My focus shifted entirely back to the woman sitting frozen at the heavy oak table. Monica was trembling violently, her eyes darting toward the heavy wooden door, desperately searching for a miraculous escape route that simply did not exist. I reached back into the thick leather dossier, my fingers gripping the final, most horrifying documents Victor had meticulously prepared during our long night of intense investigation. I pulled out a thick stack of papers, heavily highlighted with bright yellow markers, and slapped them directly onto the polished wood right in front of my son. Bradley was breathing heavily, his face pale and stricken, visibly struggling to comprehend the massive scale of the real estate trap I had just exposed. I placed my rough hand gently over his trembling knuckles. "I truly wish the fraudulent foreclosure was the absolute worst part of this living nightmare." "Bradley," I murmured, letting my voice soften just a fraction for my heartbroken boy, before hardening into sharp, unforgiving steel as I turned my furious gaze toward his wife. "But this incredibly ruthless woman did not just want to leave you homeless on the street." I pointed a rigid finger at the top page of the highlighted stack. Bradley slowly looked down, his eyes scanning the dense columns of numbers and bright red warning flags. It was a comprehensive federal credit report pulled directly from the primary national bureaus. "Over the past 6 consecutive months, I stated, my voice echoing loudly through the tense room, your loving wife has systematically and intentionally stolen your identity. She secretly forged your electronic signature to rapidly open 4 massive unsecured personal loans. She completely maxed out 5 separate premium credit cards, intentionally hiding the digital paper trail behind a secondary encrypted server. She has quietly buried you under $200,000 of highly toxic, suffocating debt, quietly siphoning all of that stolen cash directly into her untraceable offshore accounts." Bradley let out a sharp, choked gasp, physically recoiling from the heavy wooden table as if the documents had suddenly caught fire. He stared at Monica, his eyes wide with an unimaginable, devastating agony. "You stole my identity," Bradley whispered, his voice cracking under the immense weight of the horrific betrayal. "You completely ruined me." Monica desperately tried to shake her head, her perfectly manicured hands fluttering wildly in the air, but her throat was completely dry, incapable of producing a single defensive sound. I was absolutely not finished. I slammed the final, most terrifying document onto the table right on top of the ruined credit history. "And here is the grand finale of their beautiful corporate symphony," I announced, letting my righteous fury completely consume the room. 5 weeks ago, Monica secretly purchased a massive multi-million-dollar term life insurance policy on your life. The guaranteed financial payout upon your death is structured for exactly $3 million. And the sole uncontested beneficiary officially listed on this legally binding contract is sitting right across from you. I leaned heavily across the polished oak table, forcing Monica to meet my burning, relentless gaze. "You were not just planning to leave him completely broke and heartbroken, Monica," I growled, my voice dripping with absolute, unadulterated disgust. "You were actively putting a highly lucrative price tag directly on his life. You built a flawless trap to completely ruin his entire world, hoping his ultimate despair would guarantee your massive payday. Or perhaps your professional criminal partner over there was already arranging a tragic, highly untraceable, fatal accident once you were both safely hidden overseas." The sheer suffocating weight of the fully exposed truth finally crushed her carefully maintained facade. Monica let out a piercing, hysterical wail, her trembling legs giving out completely beneath the table. She collapsed heavily onto the hardwood floor, her expensive designer handbag falling and spilling its glossy contents across the room. She scrambled frantically on her hands and knees toward Bradley, desperately reaching out to grab the fabric of his suit trousers. "Bradley, please," she sobbed, thick tears streaming rapidly down her flushed cheeks, completely ruining her perfect makeup. "You have to believe me, it was all him. Julian forced me into this horrible plan. He threatened me. He told me he would physically hurt me if I did not help him secure your father's money. I never actually wanted to hurt you, I swear to God." Julian, currently pinned firmly against the glass wall by the federal investigators, let out a harsh, incredibly bitter laugh. "Do not let this psychopathic woman play the innocent victim," Julian spat, his sophisticated corporate persona entirely replaced by venomous, aggressive self-preservation. She orchestrated the entire credit fraud scheme entirely by herself. She came to me with the offshore real estate plan. She proudly told me her husband was a gullible, pathetic fool, and her father-in-law was an incredibly easy target with a massively fat wallet. She filed the fraudulent life insurance paperwork from her own personal laptop. I have the digital server logs to legally prove it. "I will give you absolutely everything you need to bury her," Julian declared, looking directly at Victor Rossi with desperate, pleading eyes. Bradley stood completely paralyzed in the center of the room, quietly watching as the two greedy monsters viciously tore each other apart, desperately trying to violently throw each other directly under the proverbial bus to save their own miserable skins. He slowly looked down at the weeping, pathetic woman currently groveling at his feet. He looked at the woman he had faithfully married, deeply loved, and implicitly trusted with absolutely every single aspect of his entire life. He finally saw the horrific, bloodthirsty greed hiding just behind her desperate, flowing crocodile tears. With a slow, incredibly deliberate motion, Bradley reached down and forcefully peeled her manicured fingers completely off the fabric of his pant leg. He took 3 massive, highly definitive steps backward, entirely removing himself from her desperate physical reach. The look of absolute, unadulterated disgust clearly etched across his face was a truly powerful testament to a genuinely good man finally seeing the absolute devil operating in broad daylight. "Do not ever touch me again," Bradley whispered, his voice shaking with a profound, terrifying finality that echoed loudly through the room. "You are completely dead to me." I stood tall beside my son, placing a firm, fiercely protective hand directly onto his shoulder. The frail, confused old man they thought they could easily manipulate was entirely gone. I watched silently as the federal agents began securely locking the heavy steel handcuffs tightly around Monica's wrists. They had meticulously designed the absolute perfect corporate execution, completely blind to the fact that I was already forcefully rewriting their miserable, pathetic ending. The predatory ghost ship had officially sunk, and they were definitively going down with it. I looked down at the ruined legal documents. We had finally won our lives back. The federal agents did not waste another second. The senior investigator firmly grasped Monica by her upper arms, effortlessly spinning her around to face the glass wall. The sharp, heavy click of solid steel handcuffs ratcheting tightly shut around her delicate wrists echoed like a gunshot in the sterile conference room. She fought against the restraint instantly, her initial shock boiling over into absolute, unrestrained hysteria. She thrashed her shoulders wildly, her perfectly manicured nails scraping uselessly against the cold glass as the agent pulled her backward. "You cannot do this to me," Monica screamed, her voice tearing through her throat with a raw, feral desperation. "I am the victim here. He manipulated me. Bradley, tell them to stop. Tell them I am your wife. You have to save me." Bradley did not move a single inch. He stood completely rigid for a long moment, next to the heavy mahogany table, his eyes hollow and dead, as he watched the woman he had loved completely unravel. He offered her absolutely nothing, not a word of comfort, not a glance of pity. His silence was the ultimate condemnation. Julian Vance proved to be a completely different kind of coward. As the second agent secured his wrists, the disgraced broker immediately began attempting to negotiate his surrender. He practically begged the investigators for a preliminary plea deal, rapidly listing offshore account numbers and naming 2 silent partners located in overseas jurisdictions. He promised to hand over the entire digital network of his fraudulent operation in exchange for federal leniency. The agents simply ignored his pathetic bargaining, reading him his constitutional rights in a flatboard monotone as they forcefully marched him toward the heavy oak doors. Monica dug the heels of her expensive designer shoes into the hardwood floor, actively resisting the physical extraction. She realized Bradley was never going to intervene to save her, and her desperate pleading instantly morphed into pure, venomous hatred. She turned her head, fixing her wild, dark eyes squarely on me. "You ruined everything," she shrieked, her face contorted into a deeply ugly mask of pure malice. "You should have just signed the paper and died quietly. You are nothing but a stubborn, ignorant old man." I stared back at her without a single ounce of emotion. The federal agent gave her a firm shove, propelling her out of the conference room and down the long corporate hallway. Her bitter screams faded gradually as the elevator doors sealed her fate. The heavy silence that followed was suffocating. Bradley slowly sank into a leather chair, burying his face deep inside his hands. His shoulders trembled with silent, agonizing shock. Victor Rossi stepped forward quietly, gathering the scattered, glossy photographs and slipping them securely back into the thick manila envelope. He placed a steady, reassuring hand on Bradley's shoulder. "Listen to me very carefully, son," Victor said, his gruff voice surprisingly gentle and steady. "The financial damage she caused is significant, but it is absolutely not permanent. We have the complete digital server logs, the forged electronic signatures, and a federal indictment against a documented fraudster. I am filing an immediate civil injunction against every single one of those unsecured personal loans. We are going to legally contest the entire debt portfolio based on systemic identity theft. It will take a few months of grinding through the bureaucratic legal system, but I promise you, we will wipe your credit history completely clean. You are not going to carry her toxic baggage for the rest of your life." Bradley offered a slow, incredibly fragile nod, but his eyes remained firmly fixed on the polished wood floor. He was a broken man, completely hollowed out by the sudden violent destruction of his entire reality. I thanked Victor for his brilliant work, gathered my coat, and gently guided my son out of that toxic building. The long drive back to my old farmhouse was entirely silent. Bradley sat in the passenger seat of my battered pickup truck, staring blankly out the window at the passing gray Seattle skyline. He did not shed a single tear, but I could feel the immense crushing weight of his profound humiliation radiating through the cab. He had given Monica his absolute trust, his unconditional loyalty, and his entire heart, only to discover she viewed his very existence as a disposable stepping stone to a massive financial payout. We pulled onto the familiar dirt driveway, the loose gravel crunching loudly beneath the heavy tires. I parked the truck near the old wooden barn and killed the engine. The rural silence washed over us, a stark contrast to the chaotic corporate battleground we had just left behind. I walked inside the quiet kitchen, opened the rattling refrigerator, and pulled out 2 cold bottles of local beer. I carried them outside to the wrap-around wooden porch where Bradley had already taken a seat on the weathered wooden steps. I sat down heavily beside him, the old wooden boards creaking under my weight. I handed him a sweating glass bottle. He took it mechanically, resting it against his knee without taking a sip. We sat there together for a long time, quietly watching the overcast sky slowly transition into a deep, bruised purple dusk. There was absolutely no need for long, dramatic, emotional speeches. The profound wreckage of the day spoke for itself. My son needed quiet strength, not a psychological lecture on the dark complexities of human betrayal. "I am so incredibly stupid," Dad, Bradley finally whispered, his voice incredibly hollow and laced with a deep, punishing shame. "I brought a monster straight into our family. I handed her the keys to my life and she tried to casually murder us both for a payday. I do not even know how to begin picking up these pieces. I feel completely hollow." I took a slow, measured sip of my beer, letting the cold liquid ground my thoughts in reality. I looked out over the sprawling acres of land I had worked my entire life to secure. I turned to look directly at my son, making sure my eyes conveyed the absolute, unshakable certainty of a man who had weathered every storm life could possibly throw. "A man can be blinded by love, Bradley," I said, my voice steady, gritty, and completely devoid of any pity. "Love makes good men drop their shields and ignore the warning signs. That is not a fatal character flaw. That simply means you have a generous heart. She exploited your basic human decency, and that is a reflection of her fundamentally broken soul, not yours. You survived a calculated ambush today. You walked away with your freedom, and she is currently sitting in a federal holding cell." I reached over and firmly tapped the thick breast pocket of my worn leather jacket, right where the cashier's check was still safely tucked away. "But hear me clearly," I continued speaking, the undeniable, gritty father-to-son truth. "We absolutely do not break over money. They tried to burn our legacy to the ground, but the foundation is solid rock. The money is still here. Your life is still here. We rebuild tomorrow together." 6 months have passed since that dark evening on the front porch. The long process of untangling my son from Monica's massive web of deceit took a toll, but we never surrendered. Victor Rossi proved to be worth every penny. He systematically dismantled the fraudulent accounts, dragging the predatory lenders into federal court until the toxic debt Monica accrued was officially wiped clean. The divorce proceedings were swift, brutal, and completely one-sided. Monica attempted to fight aggressively, demanding spousal support, but the massive pile of federal indictments hanging directly over her head effectively silenced her greedy demands. Last Tuesday, I sat quietly in the back row of a federal courtroom and watched the final judgment come down. Monica sat at the defense table, stripped of her designer clothes and heavy makeup. She looked incredibly small, pale, and entirely defeated. The federal judge showed absolutely zero leniency for her documented role in the wire fraud scheme and malicious identity theft. She was sentenced to 15 consecutive years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. Julian Vance, having desperately tried to barter his way to a lighter sentence, was handed 20 years. As the bailiff clamped the steel handcuffs around her wrists and led her away, Monica did not look back. Bradley did not attend. He had already moved past her. We never bought the beautiful suburban dream home with the grand staircase and the marble countertops. That property was permanently tainted, saturated with the dark, poisonous energy of the criminal trap that almost destroyed my son. Instead, we sat down at my worn kitchen table a few weeks after the arrest, drinking black coffee and staring at the original cashier's check for $950,000. The massive sum of money that was supposed to secure his future had almost violently ended it. "I want to do something real." Dad Bradley had told me that morning, his voice finally completely steady and clear. "I am so tired of fake people, fake promises, and fake corporate houses built on absolute lies. I want to work with my hands. I want to build something that actually matters." That simple conversation became the absolute bedrock of our entirely new lives. We pooled my entire life savings with Bradley's remaining capital, and we formally established a brand new residential construction company. We named it Diane's Foundation Builders, honoring the memory of my beautiful late wife, the woman who had always believed in the undeniable power of a sturdy, honest home. We deliberately bypassed the wealthy, upscale, highly pretentious suburban neighborhoods. Instead, we purchased several vacant, overgrown plots of land in a modest, working-class district that desperately needed genuine revitalization. Our mission was to construct high-quality, affordable, and honest homes for hard-working young families being mercilessly priced out of the current predatory housing market. Today, the early morning sun is shining brightly over our very first active job site. The air is thick with the rich, incredibly satisfying smell of freshly cut pine wood, churning diesel engines, and damp, freshly poured concrete. I am standing near the edge of the newly excavated foundation, wearing a bright yellow hard hat and my old leather work boots. I hold a rolled set of architectural blueprints tightly in my right hand, watching the heavy machinery shift massive piles of dark brown earth across the property line. Bradley is standing less than 20 feet away from me. He looks completely transformed. The pale, exhausted corporate shell of a man I saw trembling in that sterile conference room 6 months ago is entirely gone. He is wearing a faded gray shirt, heavy denim work pants, and a thick leather tool belt strapped securely around his waist. A thin sheen of sweat coats his forehead as he expertly guides a massive wooden support beam into its designated structural bracket. He communicates loudly with our newly hired framing crew, his voice projecting a natural, commanding authority that genuinely swells my chest with an immense, unshakable paternal pride. He has finally found his true purpose. The devastating, highly traumatic heartbreak of Monica's horrific betrayal did not completely destroy him. It fundamentally reforged him. Working outside in the hot sun, physically building solid walls and pouring deep, permanent concrete foundations has slowly healed the invisible wounds she viciously carved into his soul. Every single nail he drives into the solid wood is a definitive testament to his incredible resilience. Every wall we raise together on this dusty plot of land is a massive, towering monument to our survival. I walk slowly across the uneven dirt, stepping carefully over scattered tools and thick electrical cords until I am standing directly shoulder to shoulder with my son. He wipes his sweaty brow with the back of his dirty glove and turns to look at me. A wide, genuine smile effortlessly breaks across his face, reaching all the way up to his bright, vibrant eyes. It is the exact same pure, trusting smile he had when he was just a little boy, helping me fix the lawnmower in our old garage. "Looks completely level," Dad, Bradley says, patting the massive wooden beam with a heavy, satisfying thud. "We are making some serious progress today. We should be ready to start placing the roof trusses by early next week." I nod slowly, reaching out to firmly grip his sturdy shoulder. "It looks absolutely perfect, son," I reply, my voice thick with a profound, overwhelming gratitude that words can barely capture. "You are doing an incredible job. Diane would be so immensely proud of the man you have become." He looks back at the wooden framework of the new house, his chest rising and falling with deep, contented breaths. He does not need a massive multi-million-dollar trust fund or a fake, perfectly manicured wife to validate his existence anymore. He has his hands, his integrity, and his family. The heavy, dark clouds of deception and greed have completely passed, leaving behind a beautifully clear, bright blue sky. We stand there together in the comfortable, peaceful silence, listening to the rhythmic, powerful pounding of heavy hammers echoing loudly across the busy job site, completely secure in the knowledge that we are finally building something that absolutely no one can ever tear down. The hardest lesson I have learned is that betrayal from someone you love can easily turn your heart to stone. However, you cannot let the greed of others destroy your fundamental capacity to trust. Money is nothing but a temporary tool. It can be used to build a beautiful life or as a weapon to destroy one. Family, genuine loyalty, and honest hard work are the only things that truly matter when the dust settles. We did not break over their calculated deceit. We simply took those shattered pieces and used them to build something completely unbreakable and undeniably permanent. Did you like my new story? Which city are you listening from? Let us meet in the comments. If you enjoyed the story, please support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more content like this. Do not forget to subscribe today. With love and respect,